Landman is back this week with the 5th episode of Season 2, and with it coming in at just over an hour long, it was an episode that, despite not being full of action, there were a lot of developments that shaped the direction for the rest of the season. With Tommy struggling to deal with being both the CEO of the company and also a landman, Cami wanting to get into business with Dan Morrell despite the fact that he's the leader of the cartel, it now seems like division is going to be forming within MTech that might make the others turn on Tommy. So with that, let's dive into the episode and break down all the important details. Here is Landman Season 2 Episode 5 Ending Explained. Just to let you know, this video will contain spoilers. The Ending Explained. Within this episode, we quite literally saw Tommy spending the majority of it on the road as he was going from one issue to the other. First on his list was dealing with his son Cooper, and the fact that Dan Morrell essentially had Cooper right where he wanted him with the deal that was in place with the different wells. This is why MTech instead bought the leases off of Cooper, and Tommy instead wanted Cooper to become a landman and run a rig. That way he'd have stable employment, a good income, and not be exposed to the world of crime that Dan Morrell was essentially dragging him into. This also meant that Sonrisa wouldn't need to be involved either, which solved Tommy's problem because it meant that Dan would be out of the picture. However, with the wider issue of the $400 million going missing and them needing to find it and essentially set up a new rig off the coast of Louisiana, that was what was keeping Dan Morrell in the story. Dan got his teeth into Cami in the previous episode when they met for dinner, and even though Cami didn't know that he was the leader of the cartel, once Tommy revealed that information and shared that that was the reason as to why he didn't want Dan to loan them the money, because in the eyes of the FBI, it would make MTech look like the engine of their money laundering operation. Cami was ultimately more than happy to go along with it. It didn't faze her. The alternative option was for MTech to declare bankruptcy and for the company to essentially lose the majority of its assets and its leases, and Cami wasn't prepared to do that. More so because it was Monty's company that he started in their garage, and she felt it would have been tainting his legacy. So with Cami essentially turning on Tommy and showing herself to be somebody that didn't mind crossing onto the other side of the law if she was simply just turning a blind eye to what Dan did, I think this could begin the very divide between Cami and Tommy and tie into the story that could be at the heart of the second part of the season. They're now sitting on different sides of the decision, and they're both strong personalities, so there's definitely going to be clashing. Dan will be looking to get in the middle of both of them as well and poison Cami's wider perception. In this scenario, Cami should be listening to Tommy. We saw just how dangerous it could be in getting caught up with Dan in Season 1. And I think this is where the chaos will start to evolve for MTech, Tommy, and Cami. I think with the H2S leak incident also occurring and workers being injured, morale is probably going to be quite low too. So if there's news about the company potentially standing before a grand jury for embezzlement and insurance fraud, workers are being injured, and bankruptcy potentially being on the horizon, MTech is quite literally in the mud, and it'll be looking like Tommy won't want to take the most obvious route to save it. However, the route he'd want to take would be the one on the right side of the law. Right at the end of the episode, the pirate dinner and the effort that Angela went to was something that really stood out to me. Personally, I didn't like the abrupt nature of the ending, but what it showed was that the most important thing was family and the care that they all had for each other. Tommy didn't like the idea of the pirate dinner and even shook his head before he walked into his home. However, once he was with the people that he cared about most around the table, we saw that that was what truly mattered and why he was doing everything that he was. This was the very thing that Cami no longer had. TL. When it came to TL in this episode, it opened up with him sitting and looking out at the sky, just like what he did when he was in the assisted living home. However, this time he had a different view. What this symbolized was that he didn't truly know what to do with himself now that he had the freedom of the world. This is why he phoned Tommy, because he was bored and felt like he didn't have a purpose. When Angela and Aynsley returned, they almost brought the life into the house, and we saw the simple things in life. A conversation, two people that loved each other, and just excitement was something that brought him joy. He hadn't had joy in his life for such a long time. As he said at the start of the season, he felt like he was dying slowly. But here he now was, towards the end of his life, but he'd finally started living again. He even saw his wife in Aynsley, which is why he said, "You look just like her." It almost transported him back to the time before they lost their child, when things started going wrong for the both of them. TL's arc was one that felt quite wholesome, pure, and we saw him simply being there for Tommy and just relaxing and enjoying having family around him. Something that he'd never had before. Cooper. What we saw with Cooper in this episode was that other than his father buying the leases off of him, which saved him from Dan Morrell, we saw that Ariana told Cooper that she wanted him to drive off and meet her parents. Cooper drove there with the intention of asking her father for permission to marry her, but as her father said, he didn't need his permission because Ariana basically sent him there as a test to see if he had the bottle to be able to do it, which we saw he did. Cooper is in love with Ariana, and despite Tommy thinking that it's a car crash waiting to happen, I think there will be a successful love story between them. Tommy does also care about Ariana, as we saw when he gave her a $200 tip for pouring him a drink when he didn't even take the drink. He just gave her the money because he wanted to show that he was looking out for her. I do wonder if this means we're going to be building towards a Cooper and Ariana wedding before the season comes to an end. Angela and Aynsley. Last week, I thought Angela and Aynsley weren't actually that bad of characters with the way that they were included into the funeral story. However, in this week's episode, they reverted right back to being their usual annoying selves. The whole story with the old folks is something that I just find terribly corny, unfunny, and boring whenever it comes on. It just feels like cheap humor, and I don't know why it's included. It adds nothing to the story, but ends up just driving up the runtime. This episode was an hour and 4 minutes, and realistically, it didn't need to be. They're two-dimensional, surface level, and I actually think the show would be better off without them. My review of the show. Personally, I thought this episode was weaker than the ones that we've had so far this season. I thought it was a little slow, it dragged a bit, and not much actually happened. If I'm being honest, I'm struggling to enjoy this season when compared to the first. The cartel element felt like it was a lot more involved in season 1. It felt like there was more action and I was a bit more hooked on it. This one just kind of feels like Tommy is on the road, and with that we're getting far less time with him and the interactions that he has with the other characters. When I think back to season 1, it felt like there were explosions, deaths and drama, and that was what was keeping me engaged, but this season just feels a bit more diplomatic in its approach. We're seeing a lot of conversations and not a lot of doing, which I'm a little bit disappointed with. I'm hoping with Cami taking the side of the cartel, it's going to cause a divide and we might actually get a bit more action starting to form in the show. In terms of the performances, I thought they were pretty strong as per usual. Billy Bob Thornton as Tommy Norris never fails to make me laugh with some of his one-liners. Despite the stressed nature that he has and the running at 1,000,000 miles an hour, he still comes across as quite a cool character that you quite enjoy following. I also thought Sam Elliott as TL made a great incorporation too. We got to see a bit more range from him this week, and I thought it was delivered really well. When Shelby said how he had a cool voice, she was literally saying what all of us have been thinking and have said over the years. Personally, I'm hoping that the show is going to improve over the course of the next few weeks. We're now at the halfway point in the season, and I just feel like there needs to be something consequential to happen for it to feel like it's worthwhile. I love Taylor Sheridan's work, but this season is just proving to be a bit of a slow burn at the moment. But I feel it might well change. So, there you have it. Landman Season 2 Episode 5 Ending Explained. If you want to see more videos on Landman Season 2, then check the playlist below. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future videos. I'll be breaking down the rest of the season. What did you think of this episode? Do you think this season's a bit of a slow burn? Share your thoughts in the comments. As always, thanks for tuning into the video and I'll see you in the next one.